My phone lit up at 3:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, staring at the ceiling, doing that thing you do when your life has fallen apart, replaying every moment, every sign you missed, every time you told yourself you were being paranoid. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized the area code. It was from my hometown. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail like I do with every unknown number after 9 p.m. But something, and I genuinely cannot explain this, something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was young, shaking, and she said 4 words that made the entire room tilt sideways. She took your folder. I sat straight up in bed. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Who is this? I whispered. There was a long pause. And then she said, I think I'm your sister. And I think you need to know what our mother has done. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 14 months. I didn't even know she had another daughter. And what that girl told me next, over the next 47 minutes of that phone call, unraveled a deception so deep, so calculated, so personal, that it took everything in me not to completely fall apart. This is my story, and I need you to hear all of it. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe to BetrayalLedger for more. My name is Mara. I'm 34 years old. And up until about 2 years ago, I genuinely thought I was one of the lucky ones. I know that sounds naive, but hear me out. I grew up in a small city in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your business, and the biggest drama is who brought potato salad to the church potluck. I was an only child, raised mostly by my mom after my dad left when I was 9. We weren't rich. We weren't even comfortable, really. But my mom worked 2 jobs, kept the lights on, and made sure I had what I needed for school. I was grateful for that. I told myself to be grateful for that, even when things between us felt complicated. Even when I couldn't quite name why being around her left me feeling slightly hollow. I moved to Chicago at 22 for graduate school, got my master's in graphic design, and built myself a pretty solid little life. I had a good job at a mid-sized branding agency. I had a small but beautiful apartment with plants I actually kept alive. I had friends, a routine, a portfolio I was proud of, and I had a dream. For almost 3 years, I had been quietly, obsessively building something on the side. A brand identity and business plan for my own design studio. I'd done hundreds of hours of research. I'd saved money. I had a name, a logo, a website concept, a full client pitch deck. All of it saved in one master folder on my laptop and backed up on an external hard drive. I kept in my desk at home. I called it the Ember Project because I'd built it from nothing, from a spark, and then someone put it out. To understand what happened, I have to take you back about 3 years, to the moment my mother called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon and told me she'd met someone. Now, my mom, her name is Diane. My mom had been single for a long time. Since my dad left, really, except for a brief relationship in my early 20s that I never got the full story on. So when she called, breathless and almost giggly in a way I'd never heard from her, saying she'd met a man named Gerald at her church's singles group, I was genuinely happy for her. Gerald sounded decent, retired electrician, 2 grown kids of his own, owned his house outright. My mom seemed lighter when she talked about him, less like the tightly wound woman I'd grown up with and more like someone who'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for 30 years. What I didn't expect was the woman who came with Gerald. Not a daughter, not a wife, a friend. Her name was Priya. Priya was 31 at the time, 3 years younger than me, and she had been Gerald's late wife's closest friend. After Gerald's wife passed, Priya had apparently stayed close to the family, helped Gerald through his grief, and somewhere along the way, had become something like an honorary member of his household. When I came home for Christmas that year, I met Priya for the first time. She was stunning, I'll just say it. Dark hair, warm smile, the kind of effortless confidence that makes you feel slightly underdressed just standing next to her. She was charming. She asked me thoughtful questions about my work. She laughed at the right moments. She complimented my mom's cooking in a way that made my mom practically glow. I liked her. That's what makes this so hard to say out loud, even now. I liked her. We actually exchanged numbers that trip. Texted a few times in January. She followed my personal Instagram. She commented on my design work. Things like, "This is incredible, you're so talented." And I won't pretend that didn't feel good, because it did. Looking back, I can see exactly what she was doing. But at the time, I just thought I'd made a new friend. The red flags started small. They always do, don't they? The first one, and I dismissed this completely at the time, was at Easter. I came home again, and Priya was there. Which, fine. She and Gerald were close. But at one point, I walked into the kitchen to help my mom with dishes, and the two of them went quiet in a way that felt abrupt. My mom laughed a little too quickly and said they'd just been talking about Gerald's upcoming knee surgery. It was nothing. Except it didn't feel like nothing. The second one came a few months later in July. I'd called my mom to tell her some exciting news. I'd landed my biggest freelance client yet, a regional restaurant chain that wanted a full rebrand. I was going on about it, and my mom said, "Oh, Priya mentioned you'd been doing some work like that." I paused. "Priya mentioned it? When did you talk to her?" "Oh, she calls pretty often. She likes to check in." I didn't know Priya called my mother. I didn't know they had developed a relationship independent of Gerald. I filed that away somewhere in the back of my mind and moved on. The third flag, and this one I should have grabbed, came in September. I was home for a long weekend, and I was working on the Ember project late one night at my mom's kitchen table. I had everything open on my laptop, the business plan, the pitch deck, the brand guidelines, all of it. My mom came in for a glass of water, glanced at my screen and asked what I was working on. I told her. I was excited. I explained the whole concept, the studio name, the niche I was targeting, the financial projections. My mom listened, nodded, asked a few questions. And then she said, "Have you mentioned any of this to Priya? She's so interested in business." I remember thinking it was a weird thing to say. Why would I tell Priya about my private business plans? I said, "No, Mom, I'm not really telling people about this yet. It's still early." My mom just nodded and went to bed. I should have closed the laptop. I should have closed it and never opened it at my mother's house again. But I didn't. By November of that year, something had shifted in my relationship with my mother, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. She was less available when I called. When we did talk, she seemed distracted, distant, like she was half listening. At Thanksgiving, it was me, my mom, Gerald, and Priya around the table, and I sat there watching Priya refill my mother's wine glass and squeeze her hand and call her Di, a nickname my mother had never let anyone use. And I felt something twist in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't jealousy. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't jealous that my mother had a close friend. I was unsettled by something I couldn't articulate. Something about the dynamic. The way my mom deferred to Priya. The way Priya always steered the conversation. The way certain topics, my design work, my plans, my life in Chicago, seemed to get quietly redirected whenever I brought them up. I told my friend Jess about it over the phone one night. Jess said, "Maybe your mom is just really happy and you're not used to seeing her like that." I said maybe, but I didn't believe it, not really. In January, about 14 months before that 3 a.m. call, everything blew up. And this is where I need you to pay close attention, because the thing that triggered the explosion wasn't dramatic. It was small. It was a photograph. My mom texted me a photo from what looked like a dinner party. Her and Gerald and Priya and a few people I didn't recognize, all laughing around a beautifully set table. Fine. Normal. Except in the background, propped up on the sideboard, almost too small to notice, was a printed copy of the Ember Project logo. My logo. A design that had never been publicly shared. A design that existed only on my laptop and my external hard drive. I stared at that photo for a full minute, telling myself I was wrong. Telling myself it was something else. Something similar. A coincidence of color and shape. Then I zoomed in. It wasn't a coincidence. I called my mother immediately. She didn't answer. I texted. No response. I called again and again. She called me back 2 hours later, and the moment I started explaining what I'd seen in the photo, my voice shaking, my words stumbling over each other, my mother went very, very quiet. And then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, "Mara, I think you might be overreacting." Overreacting about my own logo in someone else's house, attached to a project I'd never shown anyone. I said, "Mom, how does Priya have my logo?" Long pause. "I'm sure there's an explanation. She's been working on something new, a little side business. Maybe it's just similar." "Mom, it is my logo. I designed it. I would know." Another pause. And then quietly. "I may have mentioned some of your ideas to her. She was asking about design businesses, and I hung up the phone. That was the beginning of the end of my relationship with my mother. But it was only the beginning of what Priya had actually done, because here's what I didn't know yet, and this is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I didn't know that my mother hadn't just mentioned my ideas. And here's where I have to tell you something else that happened, something I discovered weeks later that reframed everything. But I need to get there in the right order, because if I tell you now, it won't hit the same way. Just know this: what my mother did, or allowed to happen, was so much bigger than I understood in that moment, and Priya had been planning it for a very long time. I spent the next several weeks in a kind of grief I didn't expect. It wasn't just about the logo, or even about the business plan. It was about the realization that my mother, the woman who'd worked 2 jobs so I could have new notebooks for school, had looked at something I'd built with years of effort and dreams and vulnerability, and she had handed it to someone else, casually, like it was hers to give. That betrayal didn't fit neatly into any category I had. It wasn't a blowout fight. It wasn't cruelty in the obvious sense. It was something quieter and somehow more devastating. It was being erased by someone who was supposed to see you most clearly. I tried to do some damage control. I reached out to Priya directly, one message, calm and professional, asking her to explain how she had my design work and requesting that she not use it. She didn't respond. I looked her up online, and that's when I found it. A newly launched Instagram account, a brand new website, a business called, and I want you to really hear this, Ember & Kober Creative Studio. The name, my Ember. The brand colors were slightly altered. The logo was tweaked just enough to claim it wasn't identical. But the entire concept, the niche, the brand voice, the service packages, the language of the pitch deck I'd spent 3 years writing, it was all there. She had taken the Ember project. She had taken my life's work, and she had launched it as her own. I went to a lawyer. I want to be honest with you. It was not the triumphant, powerful moment I'd imagined it would be. It was exhausting and expensive, and the news was not good. The lawyer explained that design theft cases are notoriously difficult, that I'd need to prove I'd created the original work, prove she had access to it, prove the similarity was substantial enough to constitute infringement, and even then, if she'd altered it enough, and apparently she'd been strategic about exactly how much to alter, it would be an uphill battle. What I did have: timestamped files on my laptop, metadata, a year-old email to myself where I'd described the entire concept, a text from my mother back in September saying, "Let me know if you ever want to show Priya your project." I hadn't responded to that text. I'd barely registered it. But there it was. My lawyer said, "This text suggests your mother intended to share your work with Priya. Whether she physically did, accessed your laptop, copied files, took photos of your screen, that's what we'd need to establish." I called my mother one last time. I told her what I'd found. I told her what I was doing. I kept my voice level. I asked her plainly, "Did you give Priya access to my computer? Did you photograph my files? Did you help her steal from me?" My mother cried. She said I was being dramatic. She said Priya was a good person who'd been through a lot. She said, "You're going to throw away our relationship over a business idea." I said, "You threw it away. I'm just finally seeing it clearly." And I stopped taking her calls. For over a year, I heard nothing from my mother. Not on my birthday, not at Christmas, nothing. I put the legal process on hold. I couldn't afford to pursue it aggressively, and the emotional cost was making it impossible to function at work. I threw myself into my job. I rebuilt. I grieved, quietly and privately, the dual loss of my dream and my mother. I told myself I was okay. I told myself I was moving forward. And then, at 3:17 in the morning on a Thursday in October, my phone lit up. The girl on the phone, her name was Senna. She was 19 years old. She was Gerald's daughter from a brief second marriage, a marriage that had apparently ended before his first wife died, and which Gerald had never mentioned to my mother until recently. Senna had grown up mostly with her own mother, had limited contact with Gerald, but had recently reconnected with him now that she was in college nearby, and in reconnecting with Gerald she had come into the orbit of my mother, and Priya. "I've been staying with your mom and Gerald on weekends," Senna told me, her voice still shaking at 3 a.m. "And I overheard something tonight that I couldn't just not tell you." She'd been downstairs getting water, The same kitchen, the same late-night moment I'd had years ago with my laptop open, when she heard Priya and my mother talking in the living room. The door wasn't fully closed. Priya was telling my mother that the Ember & Comer business had attracted the attention of a branding agency, a real, significant agency that wanted to acquire it. She was going to sell it. Sell the business she'd built on the bones of my work, for what Senna said sounded like a lot of money. And my mother? My mother said, and Senna repeated this to me word for word because she'd been so stunned she stood frozen in the hallway for 10 minutes. My mother said, "Do you think Mara could still cause problems? It's been over a year." And Priya said, "She signed nothing. She can prove nothing. I've been careful. She's not a problem." I'm going to stop here for a second, because I want you to understand what I felt in that moment. It wasn't just rage. It wasn't just hurt. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the last small piece of denial you'd been holding on to. The piece that whispered, maybe your mom didn't really understand what she was doing. Maybe she was just naive. Maybe she was manipulated too. When that piece dissolves. Completely. Permanently. My mother had known exactly what she was doing. She had known, and she had asked if I could cause problems. Not is Mara okay, not did we hurt her. Can she cause problems? I stayed on the phone with Senna for a long time. She was scared. She felt guilty for not telling me sooner. She'd only learned I existed a few months earlier, and she'd been trying to figure out if what she was seeing was as wrong as it felt. She said, "I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. But then I heard them tonight and I thought, somebody's got to tell her. Somebody's got to." I was grateful for her in a way I still don't have the right words for. I told her she didn't need to be scared. I told her she'd done the right thing. And then I told her to go to sleep, that I'd take it from here. And then I sat in my dark apartment and I made a plan. First thing the next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything, the 3 a.m. call, the acquisition conversation, Senna's account of what she'd heard. He told me this changed things significantly. If Priya was in the process of selling the business, that created a financial event that increased the stakes and potentially the urgency of my claim. He also said that Senna's testimony about the conversation, while not a recording, while just one person's account, was meaningful. It established that Priya and my mother were aware of my prior claim and had made a deliberate choice to dismiss it. We sent a cease and desist letter, formally legally on record, and we sent a second letter to the acquiring agency, informing them that the intellectual property at the center of the Ember and Comer brand was the subject of an ownership dispute. I want to be honest. I was terrified. I was convinced nothing would come of it. I was convinced Priya would laugh. The agency would side with her, and I'd be left with nothing but a legal bill. But here's what happened. The agency froze the acquisition. They didn't cancel it. They froze it. They opened their own internal review because apparently acquiring a business with an active IP dispute attached to it was not something they were willing to do without investigating. They brought in their own legal team. They requested documentation from both sides. And here is where my 3 years of obsessive, detailed, time-stamped work saved me. I had everything. I had the original concept documents from 2 years before. Ember & Co. existed. I had the email I'd sent to myself. I had metadata on my design files. I had the text from my mother suggesting I show Priya the project. I had screenshots from my own Instagram where I'd briefly posted a close-up of a mood board, months before Priya launched, that showed the color palette and visual direction. Priya had nothing like that, because she hadn't built it. She'd stolen it. The agency's legal team concluded that the foundational brand identity of Ember & Co. bore substantial similarity to my documented prior work, and that the acquisition could not proceed in good faith without resolution of the IP dispute. They pulled their offer. Priya's acquisition fell apart. She called me. I know, I was surprised too. She called from a number I didn't have saved. And I answered because, honestly, I think part of me needed to hear what she would say. She was composed at first. She said she wanted to talk. She said things had gotten complicated and maybe there was a way to resolve this. And then she said, "I'm willing to give you a percentage of any future sale if you drop the claim. A percentage of something she'd built with my idea, my brand, my years." I said no. She said, "Mara, be reasonable. You never actually launched anything. I took a concept and I executed it." I said, "Goodbye, Priya," and I hung up. My mother called the next day. I don't know who told her. Priya, presumably. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that lasted 4 minutes. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood what she was allowing. She said she'd been influenced. She used that word, influenced, as if she were a passive bystander in her own choices. She said she missed me. She said she hoped I could find it in my heart. I listened to that voicemail 3 times, and then I thought about her asking Priya if I could cause problems. I didn't call back. The IP dispute settled several months later. Not in a courtroom, those things rarely do, but through mediation. The settlement terms are confidential, so I can't give you exact numbers. What I can tell you is this. Ember and Cubiners, the business Priya built on my foundation, could not continue operating under that brand identity. She had to rebrand. Completely. The name, the logo, the visual system, all of it had to go. And I received compensation, meaningful compensation. Not life-changing money, not justice in the fullest sense of that word, but enough to matter, enough to feel like the world had not entirely failed me. My lawyer called it a strong outcome given the circumstances. I cried in my car in the parking garage afterward, not from happiness exactly, from release. I want to tell you where I am now because I think it matters. I launched the Ember Project, the real one, the original one, 8 months ago. I did it quietly at first, just a few clients, word of mouth, and then a few more. And then a design publication wrote a short piece about a new studio doing something interesting in the branding space, and things grew. It's not a massive operation, but it's mine. Every piece of it is mine. And when I work on it, I don't feel like I'm chasing something anymore. I feel like I'm building something I was always supposed to build, just on a different timeline than I'd planned. Senna and I text occasionally. She's in her 2nd year of school, studying environmental science, and she has absolutely nothing to do with Gerald's world anymore. She cut ties with him after everything came out, because she discovered he'd known about the situation and had never said a word to anyone. She's one of those people who comes into your life for a moment and changes everything, and then quietly goes on with their own story. I'm rooting for her. As for my mother, this is the part I sit with. The part that doesn't have a clean ending. I have not spoken to my mother in over a year. I don't know if I ever will. I've spent a long time trying to understand how a woman who sacrificed so much for me when I was small could make the choices she made when I was grown. I don't have a satisfying answer. I've talked to a therapist about it. I've written about it in my journal. I've cried about it at inconvenient times in grocery stores. What I've landed on, for now at least, is this. Some people love you and fail you. And you are allowed to hold both of those truths at the same time without having to resolve them. You are allowed to grieve the mother you needed, even when the one you had was doing her best by her own limited lights. And you are allowed to protect yourself from further harm, even when the person causing it is someone you once loved completely. I'm not okay, and I'm not okay. I'm just continuing, moving forward, building something from the ember of what she couldn't put out, no matter how hard she let someone try. If you've made it this far, thank you. I mean that genuinely. I know this story is heavy. It sits in that complicated space where the lines between love and betrayal, between family and harm, aren't clean or simple. And I know some of you listening have your own versions of this. A mother who chose someone else. A friend who took something from you. A moment when you realized that the person you'd trusted most had been looking at you differently than you'd ever imagined. I want to ask you something, and I really, truly want to hear your answer in the comments. Have you ever had someone close to you, a parent, a friend, a partner, take something that belonged to you? Not just a physical object, but something deeper, an idea, an opportunity, a piece of your identity, and use it for themselves? And if you have, what did you do? Did you fight for it? Did you walk away? Did you forgive? Because I think there are more of us who've been here than people realize. And we don't talk about it enough. The quiet theft, the slow betrayal, the moment you see someone you love clearly, maybe for the first time, and you don't recognize them at all. I'd love to know your story. Drop it below. I read every single comment. And if this video found you at the right moment, if something in my story felt like something you needed to hear today, please share it. Someone else out there might need it too. I'm Mara, and I'm still here. Talk soon.